Chapter 23. Eve's knuckles went white before they were barely around the first turn. She was hanging on, not because of the ride, but so she wouldn't collide with him as the coaster sent her into his seat. He could tell, because not only was she holding on, but she kept fighting to slide back into her own seat. The first two head-jerking turns were behind them when it hit him how furiously she was holding on. He knew why. He knew, and yet suddenly he didn't want her to ever be afraid to trust herself with him again. He didn't want her to hang on to life, trying not to touch him, to not get into his space every time they happened to be together. No, even if they could only be friends from here on out, he wanted her to be able to trust him. He wanted her to know that she could lean on him no matter what. And so around the third turn, he reached over and pried her hand off the bar. "Hands up," he said teasingly. "No!" she screamed as her body collided with his, and he laughed as he laid one arm around her. "I won't break," he yelled to her. A moment of indecision, and slowly her other hand let go just as the ride slung him her way. "Well, I might," she said, although there was a smile just beneath the statement. "Sorry," he yelled, fighting his way back to his seat. "No, you're not." "Yes, I am. Here, let me show you." His arm came around her shoulders again, and then, finally, she stopped fighting and let herself fold into his arms. He looked at her, and as they flew around the next corner as one, his heart could lie no longer. "See? No breaking." When she looked at him, her eyes held questions he finally felt strong enough to answer. In the next second, he felt the first raindrops splatter across his arms. His gaze went to the gray heavens above them, where his face met up with 100,000 of their comrades dropping from the sky. "Ah!" Eve screamed, pulling her arms over her head for protection, but the downpour had other intentions. Less than seconds later, what restraint the storm had exerted at its commencement vanished into sheets and sheets of bone-chilling water. The coaster rounded the last turn and began its slow climb up the last hill as the riders on board screamed, not because of the ride, but because they were getting drenched. "Oh, it's cold," Eve said, shrinking toward AJ to get away from it. There was no real decision as both arms dropped around her in protection from the chilly water. His body huddled over hers in a vain attempt to shield her until they could get back down under cover. At the top of the hill, however, the coaster, which was barely moving at all, angled across the top crest, dropped the first car off, and then jerked to a heart-wrenching stop. Instantly, AJ looked around in confusion. They should be at the bottom by now. Instead, he and Eve were lying nearly backward, looking up at a sky that was dropping buckets of cold, crystal droplets on them. "What happened?" Eve asked, unburying herself from his embrace long enough to glance around. "Why'd we stop?" "I don't know." AJ moved only enough to try to see the cause, but he could see nothing other than gray rain. "Why aren't we going?" "I don't know," he said again, as confused as she was, but struggling to find a rational explanation. "The rain, I guess. They must be afraid the brakes won't work." She glanced over the edge. "But we can't stay up here." He followed her gaze and sheepishly smiled. "Well, unless you're going to climb down, I don't see how you have much of a choice." Her gaze went to the sky as the rain slid off her face. "You mean we're stuck up here?" "I'd say that's a pretty good deduction." Despite the circumstances, he really couldn't complain when he looked at her. "Good thing you wore your swimsuit." She looked at him incredulously. "Yeah, good thing you didn't wear those white shorts." Laughter broke through his concern. "No kidding." Slowly, she spun forward in her seat, pushed her feet up higher on the car footboard, and leaned her head back into the deluge. "This is just my luck." His gaze traced over her, and all the rationalizations that he had worked so hard to come up with disappeared into the streams flowing down her face. "Why?" Barely perceptively, she shook her head. Look at me. I'm stuck on a roller coaster in the rain with somebody who'd rather jump off a bridge than talk to me. Confusion traced over him. I want to talk to you. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she let her head lean to the side to look at him. It's okay, she said softly. You don't have to lie about it anymore. I mean, I said I didn't want the whole commitment thing, and then I did a 180 on you without warning. Concern slid through his heart. That wasn't you, that was me. I should have been honest with you from the beginning. I should have told you about Dustin, about that night. Her eyes were laced with liquid that didn't come from the sky when her gaze slipped over him. You know, it's not that I don't believe you did everything you could, because I know you did. I know you would have moved heaven and earth to bring him back, even if you didn't know him or me at the time. I know that because that's how you are. But I just keep thinking about how much time you had to tell me, how many chances you had, but you never said anything. I didn't know how, he said as guilt slipped into his voice. He wanted to reach out to her, take her in his arms, and somehow go back and start over, but he was here, and here was all he had. I knew I should tell you, but I just kept thinking about all the things I could have done that night that I didn't do, and all the things I did that I shouldn't have. I felt responsible, Eve, like I was the reason you were in so much pain. I mean, I know Dustin meant everything to you, that he was the only guy you could ever love like that. And I understand that, I really do. His gaze found the shadows at their feet. I just kept thinking if he was still here, if Dustin was still alive, you would never have even looked at me. His hand went up to his hat and ran itself over it. Then I'd think how completely horrible that sounded, and it was like if I just didn't tell you, if you just didn't know, somehow I wouldn't have to feel so guilty for loving you. Her gaze jumped to his face, and he tried to look at her, even as he tried not to let the tears burning in his head fall. I never meant to hurt you, he said. That's lousy now, I know, but you've got to believe it. I loved everything about being with you, the popcorn and the painting, and just the way I felt when I was around you. I didn't want to lose that. I didn't want to lose you. He shrugged slightly. I guess that worked, huh? Quickly he ran a hand over his face. His gaze dropped to his hands. I just thought you should know that. The splattering of the raindrops was the only sound between them for several long moments as guilt, love, and heartbreak tore through him. He couldn't look at her, so he gazed down through the wood and metal bars beneath them. Jumping through that jumble looked far less painful than life at that moment. You know, there were things that I thought I understood, she said slowly. Things I thought I had figured out. Like if love was strong enough, it could last forever, and that forever actually meant forever. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes forever means right now. And if you squander right now, all the rest of forever means nothing. I think about all those moments that I could have had with Dustin, the ones that we would have had if he had lived, but those don't compare to the ones when I had a chance to be with him, and I didn't because I thought we had a tomorrow. Sometimes tomorrow isn't real. Sometimes if you don't grab on and hold on to today, all you have is memories of memories that never happened because you were too busy living for tomorrow. I won't lie to you. Dustin was a big part of my life, and he'll be part of me forever, but that doesn't give me the right to use him to push my life away now. If I sit here and let my past keep me from my present, then I've made the same stupid mistake I made with Dustin. It was then that he felt her hand on his shoulder as the splatter slowed. His gaze went to hers. I can't promise you forever, she said, fighting through the tears. I can't even promise you tomorrow. But I can promise right now, if you're interested. If I'm... Because the truth is, I love you, AJ Knight. Right here and right now, I love you. With a crack, his heart burst open, his gaze buried deep into hers. I'm so sorry. As the raindrops ebbed from between them, she shook her head. No, that's the past. Let it go. I have. Besides, I just said I love you, and I want to know what you have to say about that right now. He smiled. You have to ask? Then his smile fell as gently he laid his hands on her shoulders. His gaze slipped through her eyes into her soul. I love you, Eve, and I want to spend every right now I have left with you. Love, hope, and joy flooded over him as he slowly leaned toward her. When his lips found hers, he knew there had never been anything more perfect in all of his life. As his hold on her tightened, suddenly the coaster chugged upward, jerking so unexpectedly that their noses crashed together. Ow! She said, backing away from him and laughing as she put her hand to her nose. One rung at a time, they approached the crest. He laughed with an apology twined in it. I kiss you and you say ow? Yeah, talk about hands up, she said, wickedness lacing her words. Slowly her arm dropped around his shoulders as her other hand wound over his hand that rested on the bar. He caught her intent just before she made it to his lips, and, just as they crested the top, she removed the last link of the chain between them. Their lips met again in perfect time with the screams of their fellow riders. Dropping out of the sky had never been so thrilling, and by the time the coaster braked and slowed into the station, his head was whirling like it never had before. When she backed up to look at him, there was a smirk of satisfaction on her face. So, how was that? She asked, as though there wasn't a single other person for miles. Awesome, he breathed, falling through her eyes. The coaster jerked to a stop, and the bar went up, but neither of them moved. I love you, he said, barely getting the words through the feelings jamming his chest. I love you too, she said, and he could see no hesitation anywhere in her. Hey, you two, Gabe called from the platform. Haven't you spent enough time in that car? Eve winked at AJ with a look that his heart knew said, not nearly long enough. Then, quickly, she rejoined reality and turned to get out onto the platform. Gabe offered her a hand up, and she climbed out. AJ wanted all of reality to just go away and leave them alone. However, that not being a logical option, he swung himself up and out of the car, only to find her waiting for him. There was no hesitation as she wrapped an arm under his, and everything in him wished they never had to let go. However, he saw the skeptical look that Jeff shot at him as they headed for the exit, and he knew that their right now on top hadn't followed them to the bottom. Okay, mister. Gabe punched Jeff in the chest, which caught Jeff totally off guard, as he was busy watching AJ and Eve. You owe me money. Pay up. Money? How do you figure? Jeff asked, never quite making the leap from AJ and Eve to Gabe's statement as they descended the exit ramp. Yep, $20. You said you weren't going to let go at the top, and you did. No, I said I wouldn't let go. Oh. Yeah, oh, you owe me $20. Now, pay up. Even as he laughed, AJ saw Lisa and Ashley standing under an awning across the walkway, although the deluge had all but dissipated. Like it or not, being together with Eve would have to wait. He pulled his arm from her shoulders reluctantly and stuck his hand in his pocket. He wanted to hold her, to tell the world that he loved her, but what he simply couldn't do was to hurt Melody. And he was sure coming off a ride like a love-struck teenager with a woman Melody despised wasn't the best way to accomplish that, especially when she had been waiting for him at the bottom for more than 20 minutes. However, Eve's fingers never untangled themselves from his belt loop, and his heart loved that feeling too much to explain why she should let him go. "That's not fair," Jeff said. "You changed the rules." "I didn't change the rules. It was an act of God," Gabe said seriously. "I guess he wanted me to have that money more than he wanted you to." "Nice try," Jeff said as they walked up to the other two women. "Lisa, tell your husband he should honor his debts," Gabe said. Jeff put an arm around Lisa, and she squirmed away from him because he was soaked. "Don't you know by now he doesn't listen to a word I say? We're married, remember?" "Ah, geez," Gabe said, snapping his finger. "I keep forgetting that." AJ folded his arms at his chest uncomfortably, knowing how this looked, and knowing that any second, Melody was going to walk up furious. Or worse, Blaine would walk up and knock him through the funhouse mirror next to the awning. "Oh, bad news, AJ," Ashley said, shaking her head. "What's that?" "Melody got sick." "Sick?" AJ asked with instant concern, and he felt Eve's hand fall from his waist. "What happened? Where is she?" "Blaine took her home," Lisa said, looking right at Eve. "She was in pretty bad shape." "Blaine? But—" "We told them we could take Eve home," Lisa continued. "Blaine said to tell you he was sorry, Eve." "Oh," Eve said, obviously trying to sound thankful and properly crushed by the news, but no one standing there believed either. She looked at AJ uncertainly. "Maybe we should call them, make sure they got home all right." Gabe looked at his watch. "It'll be at least another hour before they get home. What do you say we head back and grab something to eat between here and there?" "Now?" Ashley said in surprise. "The park's not even closed yet." "Yeah, but my shoes are all squishy. That's annoying," Gabe said, lifting one and then the other up to demonstrate. "Oh, heavens, he has squishy shoes," Ashley said to the others dramatically. "We can't have that." "Well, if someone would pay me what he owes me, I might be able to afford new shoes," Gabe said as they turned for the gate. Jeff shook his head. "Then I guess you're just going to have to squish forever." The other two couples strode in front of them as Eve walked carefully at AJ's side, her arms crossed so as not to touch him. "I hope Melody's okay," she finally said so that the others couldn't hear her. He smiled at the note of genuine concern in her voice. "I'm sure she is. Mel always does more stuff than she should." They walked in lockstep for a minute. "I'm sorry Blaine left." Then Eve looked at AJ and smiled. "I'm not." The tissue-thin barrier between them ripped in half as he reached over and collared her around the neck. "If I didn't know better, I'd think you planned this." "I'm thinking somebody did," she said, gazing at him peacefully as she wrapped her arms around his waist. "But it wasn't me." His heart carried his lips to her head, and she giggled. "Got any ideas who I should be thanking, then?" he asked. She arched her neck over his arm and looked up into the now light gray sky above them. "Somebody who understands a whole lot more about life than I ever will." And her clutch on him tightened. "I hear you there," he breathed softly as he kissed her hair again. "I hear you there." "They said you should come," AJ said to Melody, 5 days before the July 4th holiday. "Water skiing, fireworks, and your very best friend in the whole world, all in one place. What more could you ask for?" "My very best friend, huh? This wouldn't be the same friend who asked me out on a date, then got engaged to someone else while we were there, would it?" "Okay, technically you were gone before we got back together, and secondly, we didn't get engaged." "Close enough. I mean, it's not like I've seen you since." "Okay, so there's another good reason to come, so you can see me." "Oh, yeah, that's a real incentive. Besides, I don't even know these people. They're your friends, not mine, remember? Not to even mention the fact that I'd be there by myself. So basically, I'm thinking no." "But if you come, you'll get to know them, and then they can be your friends, and we can all be friends together." "Well, as Brady Bunch as that sounds, I think you're going to have to do this one without me. Besides, you'll have Little Miss Perfect there to keep you company anyway. I'm sure you won't even miss me." "You know, Mel, Eve really is a nice person. and I'd really like it if you could at least try to be civil to her." "I am civil, from way over here." AJ sighed. "Okay, look, it's highly possible that I'm going to want you in my wedding." "I thought you weren't engaged." "But for that to happen, I think it would be nice if you at least knew the person I'd be marrying." Melody went quiet for the first time since hello, and AJ scratched his head, waiting for her answer and trying to think of another argument if she said no. "Can I bring a date?" she finally asked, and he stumbled on the question. "A date? Well, sure, I guess, if you want to. Then I'll be there." "Wow, Eve, nice suit," Ashley said when Eve and AJ walked up the steps to the lake house, where Gabe, Ashley, and Jeff were already lounging. "Thanks," Eve said, looking down at the all-black mallet that hadn't seen water in 2 years. "And what about my ensemble?" AJ asked, turning to model the oversized knee-length shorts that were 6 clashing hues of turquoise, blue, green, and orange, topped off with a blindingly white shirt. "It looks like a garage sale reject," Gabe said. "Saved me $25 going to that garage sale," AJ said. "What'd they cost? Like $1? 50 cents, AJ said proudly. "You paid too much," Jeff said, shaking his head. "Hey, AJ, is Melody coming?" Ashley asked. He shrugged. She said she was. "And she's bringing a date," Eve said with a lift of her eyebrows. "Go Melody," Gabe said. "So are we eating first or skiing first?" Jeff asked. "I vote skiing," AJ said, and they all looked at him incredulously. "What?" "Okay, Eve," Ashley said as she narrowed her gaze at him. "Who is this, and what did you do with AJ?" Eve just laughed as she huddled into the circle of his arm. He was AJ, her AJ, the man she had prayed for only in her deepest dreams. "Ugh, don't mind them," Gabe said with a roll of his eyes. "They're in love." "Who's in love?" Lisa asked as she walked out of the house with Alex, resplendent in his tiny backward cap. "Oh, look at you!" Eve squealed as she peeled Alex from his mother's arms. "If you aren't the cutest!" "See, AJ," Gabe said. "Look how fast you got replaced." Eve looked back at AJ and smiled. "You're cute, too." And he bent and kissed her. "Blech," Gabe said, standing back. "Let's get this boat in the water before I get sick." "Hey, wait for us. We're here," someone called from the side of the house, and in the next second, Blaine pulled Melody through the bushes, bounced onto the deck, and pulled her up with him. Instantly, the whole party went silent. Gabe was the first to recover. "Blaine, Melody, you made it. Cool." "Let the festivities begin," Blaine said joyfully. "I didn't know she was bringing him," Eve whispered to AJ when the others were getting into the boat. "Do I look like I knew?" he asked, and she could tell he was as thrilled as she was about the turn of events. Then he sighed and looked at her. "Don't let them ruin this, okay? I mean, you are water skiing today, right?" She wrinkled her face. "I was hoping you didn't remember that part." "Here." He held her hand as she stepped in. "You going to get that?" Gabe asked as he started the boat. "Got it," AJ answered, even as Eve took the one seat left, right next to Melody, in the back. She tried to smile at her seatmate but received only ice in return. What she wouldn't give at that moment for a bigger boat. Quickly, AJ untied first one rope, then the next, then the final as Gabe began idling the boat backward into the water. She watched AJ take hold of the side of the boat even as she tried to figure out how he was planning on getting in. Down the dock he pushed the boat, and she couldn't help but think she was glad he'd left the white shirt on the dock. That tan, that chest, those muscles. It was all she could do to keep her mind on the fact that it wasn't just the two of them out here together. Lucky for him, she thought, and then buried that thought and its subsequent smile in her shoulder. At the end of the dock, in one fluid motion, AJ pushed the boat one final time, made a leap into the boat, and landed right in front of her. "Hey there," he said with a wink, when his hands caught the sides of her seat to stop himself. "Hey," she said, gazing into his soft golden eyes. In a blink, he leaned down and kissed her, and once again, she wished they were alone. "Hey, Knight," Gabe called from the front. "Get in your seat or you're going to have to climb up there going 60. With one more wink, he left her and stepped past the captain's chairs that held Jeff and Gabe up front. The further he went from her, the less she liked this seating arrangement, until all the way at the front of the boat, he finally sat on the perch and turned back so he could watch them rather than where they were going. "Ready?" Gabe asked, revving the engine. "You know it," AJ said, and his smile slid across her heart like the rays of warm sunshine streaming down on them. The lake house had disappeared long before. Out in the lake, Gabe slowed to an idle and shut the boat off. "Okay," he said. "Who's first?" For one split second, no one volunteered. "I guess that would be me," Jeff said with a sigh. "You need help?" AJ asked. "No, I've got it." "Suit yourself." AJ grabbed the orange flag Gabe handed him. He put it in the air and watched Jeff jump into the water. In quick succession, Gabe hooked the ski rope up and swung it like a lasso over his head. "You ready?" Gabe called to Jeff, who waved. The rope sailed out to Jeff, who grabbed it. Quickly, Gabe pulled the skis out of the back seat and slid them to Jeff. A small fight ensued in the water as Jeff tried to simultaneously keep track of the rope, both skis, and his feet. "You sure you don't need help?" AJ called, fighting not to laugh. "Hey, no heckling from the balcony," Jeff yelled back as he finally got all 3 pieces of equipment in place. "Just asking," AJ said with a shrug. Gabe came back to the front and started the motor as Jeff struggled to get into position. "Get the rope on the other side of your ski," AJ called, realizing it was twisted. Jeff wrestled with it and then held up a thumb. "You ready?" Gabe yelled, looking back over his shoulder. One more moment, and Jeff went still. "Hit it!" Like a bronco, they were off. AJ watched his friend as his body went taut with the force. Then slowly, he pulled himself up. In seconds, he was sliding to one side and then the other across the water. It looked like freedom itself, and AJ couldn't wait to get out there. When his gaze fell to Eve, she looked at him in barely disguised panic, and he smiled and winked. She was going to love this as much as he did. She just didn't know it yet. "Who's next?" Gabe asked when Jeff gave up, and Eve's stomach nodded. Gabe looked around at the 3 on the back seat. "Eve?" Her chest hurt so badly she couldn't get the no to come out. It was then that she saw AJ slide from his perch back down into the boat. "Come on," he said, pulling her to her feet. "I'll help." Although it should have, that assurance didn't make her feel much better. Nonetheless, she stood and slipped out of her shorts. They stepped to the side of the boat. "Don't try to be Grace here," AJ said. "Just jump in." Berating herself for getting this close to the reality of doing this in the first place, Eve dropped her legs over the edge, covered her nose, and then fell into the water. By the time she came up, AJ was paddling beside her. "I'd give that a 10. "Shut up." She shook her head, but the smile crossed her face despite wanting to slug him. Together they swam out to where Jeff was. "Nice moves," AJ said to Jeff as they transferred a ski. "I was just happy to stay standing," Jeff said. He handed the other ski to AJ and looked at Eve. The peace in his eyes transferred into her spirit. "Good luck out there." "Thanks," she said softly. With that, he swam away. "Okay," AJ said, swinging into instructor mode. "Skis first." He wound the skis around so they were pointing toward the boat. "You're going to have to pull one of your feet up here." Fighting not to float away from him, Eve pulled one foot up, and together they got the first ski on. It flopped out awkwardly to one side as the water lapped up in her face. "Next one." She repeated the process, wondering why she had ever so much as mentioned doing this. However, before she had a chance to tell him that, he turned back to the boat. "We need the rope." Gabe started the boat, and slowly it circled them until AJ reached out like stabbing a fish and grabbed the line. When he turned back to her, Eve's "I don't want to do this anymore" mechanism kicked into gear. "I think this was a bad idea," she said, shaking her head. He smiled. "Mount Everest, here we come." He handed her the rope. "Okay, you have to sit in the water. Pull your skis up in front of you." "They are in front of me." "No, up, out of the water like this." He set his hand at an incline to the water. She tried to do what he was telling her. "They're heavy," she said, thinking that her feet looked like a giant T in the water ahead of her. Fighting the water splashing up and over her face, not to mention the pull of the skis, she yanked one up and almost got it in place just as it fell the opposite direction and splashed back into the water. Frustration took over. "Ah!" "It's not easy," AJ said, "but you can do it. You just have to get both of them up at the same time." "Oh, yeah, no problem." Pulling until her body felt like it might crack down the middle, she fought the thought that she was going to drown before she got everything into position. The water seemed to be coming from all directions at once. "This isn't working." "You've almost got it. Think pointing your feet to the sky." Finally, with one massive effort, she managed to get both skis in the air. The water around her pushed her up on its energy and then let her fall, which could have put her to sleep had she been in any other situation. "And the rope goes between them," AJ said, tossing it over the top of one ski. He waved to Gabe, and the boat roared to life. Even the rocking of the waves slipped from her mind as fear took over. "Good," AJ coached. "Now, when you say go, they're going to go, and you've got to hold on tight." Slowly, he backed away from her and smiled. "Whenever you're ready." She exhaled slowly, looked at the boat, and yanked courage to her. "Go!" The boat ahead jumped forward, and the rope in her hands yanked taut. Her hands, which she had thought were ready, jerked forward, releasing the rope, and once again she was in the water, only this time face down. She fought the skis and the current to get turned back over. Spluttering water, she resurfaced. "Not bad," AJ said, swimming up to her. She would have hated to see bad. "Okay, this time when it pulls, use your whole body to hold on, not just your arms. And pull with your leg muscles when it feels like you can stand." Stand? How about not crash? But Eve just nodded, wishing she could quit, but knowing he wouldn't let her do that after only one miserable attempt. The boat circled, and AJ grabbed the rope. The fight with her skis hadn't gotten any easier, but after 2 attempts that made her look like an unruly windmill, she got them in place. "Ready?" AJ asked, and she nodded. He waved to Gabe and swam away from her. She forced herself to concentrate as she looked at the boat. "Go!" The yank of the boat jerked the rope, but she held on with determination. It wasn't called skiing exactly, as for a few seconds she didn't even leave the water. Then, miraculously, the water let go of her. "Stand! Stand!" AJ yelled from somewhere far away from her, and she fought to get herself upright. However, at the apex of the stand, her skis decided to split her legs in two, and the rope escaped from her consciousness. 2 seconds later, she was once again face down in the water. When she found the surface, she hit the waves with one hand angrily. "Better," AJ said as he swam up to her side. He looked like part of the waves just bobbing up and down with them as he retrieved the ski she hadn't realized had come off. Carefully, he positioned it next to her. "This time, when you get up, don't lean so far forward." "I think my face is going to have water burns," she said. He laughed. "I've never seen a water burn. What would you treat something like that with?" "Well, boyfriend strangulation is the preferred method." His smile never left. "Oh, good thing we brought Blaine then." "Blaine wasn't who I had in mind," she said as her hand worked to get the ski back on. "Oh, he wasn't?" AJ asked innocently. Then who did you have in mind?" "I think you know him." The ski slipped onto her foot and she smirked at him. "He's the guy who's going to kiss me for good luck." The boat was circling as gently he reached out to her, and his lips met hers. Then he pulled back and gazed at her. "Then I guess I'm the lucky one, huh?" Her soul sparkled right through her eyes. I guess so. A moment, and then he snapped back to his job, barely grabbing the ski rope before it slid past them. When he swam back to her with it in his grasp, he was all business. When you get up, think about leaning backward, not forward. Forward and you'll crash. Oh, and keep your skis together. Don't let them separate. She nodded at his instructions as she got herself back in the water. Don't fight it, just let your body do it, he said as he handed her the rope and surveyed her positioning. Everything was set, and he leaned into her. One quick kiss, and he backed away with a wave to Gabe. Good luck. When he was gone, Eve sighed the smile away from her heart and refocused on her preparations. The moment that everything felt set, she looked up at the boat. Hit it! The boat slid forward, the rope slid forward, and suddenly she too was going forward. A moment, and another, and her feet came underneath her as she pulled up out of the water. Stand! Stand! AJ called, and her body slipped into a semi-standing position. Yeah! His instructions ran through her. Don't lean forward. Keep your skis together. Let your body do the work. Slowly, in a wide arc, she slid across the waves behind the boat. However, there was too much thinking involved to call it fun or free. 3/4 of the way around, she felt one leg losing the battle to keep the skis in line, and, with little other thought, she let go of the rope and toppled into the water. When she came up, all she could really feel was tired. She paddled until AJ made it back to her. Yeah, he said, clapping his hands above his head. You did it! Good job! I did? She asked, not totally sure this wasn't a dream. You did! Good job! He said as the boat came back around. Ready to go again? Slowly, she shook her head. I think I need a break. Okay. He waved Gabe closer. She's getting out. Gabe nodded, and AJ set to work getting her out of the skis. You next, Gabe yelled to AJ. Guess so, he yelled back. You need some help? Eve asked, and just before he said no, he caught sight of her teasing smile. Well, a kiss wouldn't hurt, he said, returning the smile. As the waves bounced her up, her lips found his, and she laughed when she backed away. Don't hit anything. He laughed. I'll try not to. She turned and swam back to the boat where Jeff bent to help her in. Looking good, he said as she half-stepped, half-fell into the boat. That's harder than it looks. Tell me about it, he said as she started for her previous seat. Oh, here, why don't you take this one? It's more comfortable. Grateful that she wouldn't have to sit in the back with Blaine and Melody, Eve slipped into the captain's chair next to Gabe. Amazing, I'm still in one piece. Gabe looked at her and laughed. Of course, you were in good hands. The best, she thought as she spun in her seat to watch AJ get ready for his run. AJ watched her swim back to the boat. Half of his attention was on her and making sure she got in all right, and half of it was on getting the skis secured on his own feet. Seeing her ski had done nothing but make him more excited about the prospect of riding the waves himself. Once the skis were on his feet, he waved to Gabe, who started the boat and circled it around. With a lunge, AJ snagged the rope. He repositioned himself in the water. Then, checking each aspect of himself to make sure all systems were go, he got his skis into position. When he was ready, he glanced forward, and all he saw was her beautiful face. This would surely be a day to remember. Hit it! Moments later, his heart wasn't all that was flying. His skis slipped easily over the glass of water in the wake of the boat. It had been years, and yet it felt like only minutes since he'd done this. With little trouble, he pulled the rope in to his stomach and leaned back on the skis as the day slid around him in a perfect arc. When the boat began its first turn, he took full advantage of it and bounced over the wave until he was right next to the boat. He waved at Eve, and joy was written all over her face when she waved back. Yes, this was perfect. More perfect than he could have asked for. Then, as he slid back behind the boat, his gaze snagged on Blaine and Melody. Okay, perfect with them around didn't shine quite as brightly, but he pushed that thought away as he leaped up over the wave on the opposite side of the boat. He wasn't going to think about them or anything other than the things that he wanted so much to remember about this day, like Eve and her kiss and her hands. When he came back around, mischief caught his heart. Carefully, he began working one foot out of his ski. Thankfully, there were no ramps to run into around here, but it had been a while since he'd tried this trick. His foot was nearly out when he picked that ski out of the water and kicked it off. The effect worked like magic as simultaneously he watched the members of the little expedition jump in surprise. Easily, he slipped his foot into the foothold at the back of the other ski and waved to them. Jeff shook his head with reluctant admiration, and even Eve eventually smiled. As he ramped over the next wave and then back over it, forcing the air under his ski, flying wasn't that far away. He pulled up behind the boat, got his balance, and then leaped out of the water, spinning and catching the rope so that he was skiing not forward but backward. It was interesting seeing not where they were going, but where they had been. That understanding slid through him as his heart retraced their steps to this point. After another minute, the decision to leave the past in the past traced through him. It was time to look forward, and with that, he made one final leap and found himself looking into the only future he ever wanted to see. Happiness flooded his soul as her smile found his consciousness. "Make the decision," something in him said, "and the courage will follow." The decision had been made, and he could feel the courage with no question. She was his future, and he was hers. They were together, and that was the only way he ever wanted to face any future he had. "Are you all going out again later?" Ashley asked as they sat in the various lawn chairs scattered across the deck, devouring the hamburgers Ashley and Lisa had made while they were gone. "I'm not. I'll get more lobster eyes than I already am," Melody said, arching her gaze so she could look at her shoulder that had already taken on a bright red hue. "Besides, I don't know how much more of that up and down wave stuff I can take." "Oh, no," Blaine said seriously from the lawn chair he occupied next to her. "Then you're definitely not going out again. We really don't want a repeat of my car after Astroworld." AJ's gaze went to the cocky face hidden behind a dark pair of sunglasses across from him. Why Melody had asked Blaine, AJ didn't even want to think about. She was too good for that jerk, and it didn't take getting to know him to know that. The designer swim trunks, the expensive sunglasses, the jet black hair, all choreographed to tell the world, "Look how wonderful I am." Melody didn't need the boat to make her sick. Her date should have done a good enough job of that. However, when Melody glanced at Blaine like he'd just fallen there from heaven, AJ wanted to do nothing more than dump him and the lawn chair into the shimmering water beyond. "What are you complaining about?" Melody said with a shrug. "You got your car cleaned. Besides, you wouldn't be here today if I hadn't gotten sick that day." "This is true," Blaine said, bobbing his head with a smirk, and AJ wished he could knock that head right off those shoulders. Then Blaine looked back at the group, clearly enjoying the attention. "So, Melody's in. Who else is going?" "I am not," she said, smacking his shoulder. "Geez, if the water didn't make me sick, all that hot dogging out there sure did." She pinned AJ with a skewering gaze before he had a chance to disengage his gaze from them. "What hot dogging?" he asked innocently. With a rip, he focused on the true reason he was here. "I was just trying to keep up with Eve." The grape soda Eve was drinking spewed from her mouth, and she quickly wiped it away. "Oh, yeah, I'm so sure you were worried about keeping up with me." "I was. You're such a natural." "You skied?" Lisa asked. "I tried," Eve said in annoyance, "but I don't think I'd exactly call it skiing." "Oh, this I've got to see," Lisa said. "Count me in." Ashley laid her hand on Gabe's thigh. "So, did you get to go out?" Gabe pointed to himself. "Driver." "I can drive if you want," AJ said with a shrug. "That way you could catch some waves." "Oh boy, that sounds scary," Gabe said. "I promise I won't run you into anything." "Yeah, but the question is, will you run the boat into anything?" AJ shook his head. If the hospital trusts me with the ambulance, I think you can trust me with one little boat. Gabe didn't say anything for a moment, and then he looked at his wife. Ash? She looked at AJ and smiled. Have fun. You need help? AJ asked as Eve prepared to take over the skier's position from Jeff. Her eyebrows arched. A kiss wouldn't hurt. No problem there, he said, pulling her, life jacket and all, to him. There was something about holding her while the boat pitched and settled. It felt like rocking on life itself, and the last thing he wanted to do was let her go. Hey, you two, cut it out. I'm drowning out here, Jeff yelled. AJ laughed as he pulled back from her and winked. Good luck. Try to keep up. Jeff stayed to help Eve as she got her equipment on. In the boat, Lisa put her hands over her head and clapped. Go, Eve! Go, Eve, she thought with a shiver of pressure. This would be quite a spectacle. Got it? Jeff asked, putting a hand on her back to steady her in the waves. Think so, she said, nodding. When he didn't move, she looked at him. I think so too, he said softly. Have fun. She wanted to say, I will, but he was gone before she got those words out. Once he was in the boat and had taken his place beside Lisa, she smiled at the symmetry of life. Yeah, she had it, and this time she was going to appreciate it. Hit it! When Gabe took over for Eve on the waves later, AJ did his best to steer the boat sanely, even though he was constantly looking back at his friend's antics. Gabe was anything but smooth. However, AJ wondered as he watched the seemingly out-of-control performance how much of it was just that, a performance. As inept as Gabe looked out on the water, no one could be that bad and stay in control. He laughed with his friends when Gabe nearly lost the rope in the middle of an attempted hand change. When Gabe ran his free hand across his forehead in relief, AJ looked at Eve and shook his head. What a ham. How did you ever guess? She asked, and with a smile, he laid one hand over hers as they skimmed across the lake, pulling Lou Costello's younger model behind them. Although Eve could tell he was trying, Blaine couldn't come close to AJ's sheer natural ability. In a way, she felt sorry for Blaine, and she felt somewhat responsible for that. He really was a nice guy. He'd just gotten thrown into a bad situation. She waved back at him as he crossed to the side of the boat. Don't encourage him, AJ said in her ear. She looked back at him. Blaine's okay if you give him a chance. But AJ looked less than convinced, so she arched her neck up to be able to catch his lips. Besides, don't let him ruin this. As his arms wrapped around her, Eve knew she would never remember Blaine's presence this day, only AJ's. He was all she ever wanted to remember again. The boat rocked in the shallow waves long after they had come back out to it. The stars dotted the sky above them. Blaine and Melody had gone home shortly after they had redocked, something about Blaine having a headache. Having one or being one, AJ had wondered, but as the evening wore on without them, even they had slid from his consciousness. He didn't want to think about them or about anything else. He was here with Eve, and his one and only goal was to make the rest of the evening one she would never forget. As they sat in the back of the boat, his arm steadied her, and she snuggled closer to him. Oh, wow, a blue one, Eve breathed, watching the sky beyond as it was lit with multicolored sparkles of crackling fire. An explosion blasted above them, and the sky lit into ivory. Oh, wow, beautiful. AJ couldn't disagree. She was, inside and out. Have you ever seen them like this? Never, she said, and his heart tripped over the peacefulness in her voice. Her body relaxed as her fingers curled around his. The fireworks continued above them as she watched. I had fun today. He hugged her tighter. So did I. Yeah, she smiled up at him. I could tell. I love water skiing. Serenity dropped through her eyes when she gazed up at him. I love you. Gently, he leaned to the side and planted a kiss on her head. Yeah, seems like I remember that part. And don't you ever forget it, she said, arching her face so that she could connect with his lips. You never know, he said when they parted. I just might forget. You'd better remind me again. She laughed. We wouldn't want that. The feel of holding her as the waves lapped up, rocking the boat gently beneath them, lulled him away from reality. Seriousness seeped through him when she pulled away. You shouldn't do this to me. What? She asked. This, he said as the fireworks finale punctuated the rhythm of the rocking of his love when he pulled her back to him. Jeff and Lisa had taken Alex home. Not long after, Gabe and Ashley had called it a night. But before they left, they had told them they could have the deck to themselves for as long as they wanted it. Snuggling with AJ on the same lawn chair, Eve thought that they had no idea how long that could actually be. The white shirt had found its way back onto his body, but that was even all right because he hadn't bothered to button it, so instead of hiding anything, it did an extraordinary job of teasing her just to the point of insanity. Softly, she ran a hand under it and across the smooth skin of his chest. If anything could feel more perfect, she didn't know how. He moaned quietly. You feel so good. She closed her eyes and huddled closer to him, swinging one sheer covered leg over his. Not half as good as you feel. For a moment, they simply sat like that, holding each other and letting forever take care of itself. His hands sliding up and down her bare arms sent shivers of excitement across the same paths that they had just put to sleep. Peace had never felt so incredibly exhilarating. Then his hand slowed to a near halt. A moment, and then two. Dance with me, he breathed, and she looked up at him in confusion. Dance? But there isn't any music. His eyes smiled. Sure there is. Carefully, he slid from under her and stood. His hand came down for hers, and when she stood, happiness flooded through her. The sheer black two-piece swimsuit cover-up gracing her body from shoulders to ankles blew gently in the breeze coming from the lake, and she brushed the tendrils of hair out of her face. Slowly, he led her out to the edge of the dock, where the small light on the lake house had ceded its hold on the darkness, lit only by the shimmering lights surrounding the water. And then there was only the two of them and the gently rocking waves below. He moved to her and slid his hands around her waist as she wrapped her wrists at his neck. What, no jitterbug? She asked with a grin. Maybe later, he said, and the seriousness of his soft face pulled her heart to him. Her temple found his shoulder as her arms wrapped down his back. The world itself floated away as their bodies moved in time to the soft lap of the waves. Water skiing would never eclipse dancing with him on these waves, she thought, releasing everything in life other than him. AJ Knight, the man of her dreams, her own personal white knight. She would cling to him with her very last breath if need be, and even then, he would be with her forever. You know, I've heard about people being in love ever since I was a little kid, he said softly, even as the pressure of his hand continued to move her side to side. And I wanted to believe it, to believe in it. But love was never anything but an illusion to me, until I met you. She was listening, and not just with her ears. His body was telling her as much as his words were. I know in this life there are no guarantees, he said, but I think you should know I've decided to make an exception to that rule. Oh yeah? What's that? She asked with the softest hint of a laugh. This, he said, and his movement stopped. When she pulled back from him, the tiny heart stone shone at her from its perch between his finger and thumb, and all teasing in her vanished. Oh, AJ, it's beautiful. She looked into his eyes, trying to surmise if it meant what she hoped it did. He smiled slightly as his gaze dropped. Carefully, he took her hand. I, AJ Knight, guarantee from this moment on that I'll be there for every single right now God grants me with you on this earth. He slid the ring onto her shaking finger as her tears blurred even his face. I guarantee that I'll protect you and that I'll love you every single moment of every single day." He gazed into her eyes with no hesitation whatsoever. "And I guarantee that I'll be honest with you and faithful to you until God Himself calls me home." Nowhere in her body, heart, or soul was there even a shred of doubt of those words. So much so that it seemed only right that she make her own pledge, although she hadn't even thought about what she would say until that very moment. "When you came into my life, I thought that I'd lost love forever, that I would never have it in my life again. What I didn't know is that not only would I find it with you, but that with you, I'd find life again, too. When I wanted to quit, you wouldn't let me. And when I wanted to cry, you let me. And then you showed me how to laugh again. I don't know how I got so lucky or why God decided to bless me with you, but I'll tell you right now, I'm sure glad He did." His eyes were shining when her words wound to a stop. "So does that mean the answer's yes?" he asked. "Well, I guess that depends on what the question is, doesn't it?" "The question," he said slowly as he bent to one knee, "is, Eve, I love you. Will you marry me?" She gazed into his eyes, and suddenly her happiness turned to mischief as she looked down at the sparkling heart now on her hand. "Yes or no? Yes or no?" she said, turning her hand back and forth. Then she stopped, looked him in the eye, and nodded solemnly. "Yes, AJ, yes, of course I'll marry you." For one instant he knelt there. Then, slowly, he stood. His arms slipped around her, and when he pulled her close, she closed her eyes, clutching that moment into her soul as together they danced on the water perfectly in time with the rhythm of God's plan. This has been White Knight, Book 2, The Courage Series, written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
Never miss a second of the story. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel today.